My friends, why is it when I take a few days off from the Ukraine reporting, this is what happens, an open-air collapse of the Ukrainian front in Bakhmut. Last time I made a video on Bakhmut, this was the situation on the ground. And this is the current one. Newsweek journalist Isabel from Bruggen said on the 3rd of January why a Bakhmut breakthrough for Russia appears unlikely. And now the same journalist just admitted why Bakhmut could decide who wins Ukraine war.
I am the danger.
The Wagnerians keep raising their flags from one strong point to another, one village after another. At this moment, the Ukrainian line of defense depends on these two villages, Berkhiva and Yahidne. As we speak, Wagnerian assault detachments are said to control 50% of Berkhiva already. The Ukrainian command is sending a lot of reinforcements there. But if this line falls, it's open ground. It will be open bar for Wagner to capture the last remaining supply line going into Bakhmut and effectively encircle the garrison. You know, usually I like to start with some foreplay, but not today. We have no time. Let's go, yalla roh! Because the Russian bulge is expanding at such an alarming rate that would make Johnny Sins blush. And from there it's just gonna get worse for Ukraine. For those that are new to the channel, it all started on February 10th with Krasna. The Wagner assault detachments had broken through across the river right here, as well as south of the river. The situation was dramatic for Krasna because Ukrainians only had this tiny gap to retreat, just enough space to fit Tom Cruise. And this withdrawal would have to be done across a river. Are we surprised? No, here's what I said in my previous video about Krasna. The Russians have a clear line of sight on any vehicle or unit going in and out of the village, meaning this position is very exposed. The Ukrainians there are fighting heroically. For days they were left with barely any supplies, and they still hold. But the question remains, for how long? The Russians had effectively put Krasna into a cauldron with only one way out. Whenever I saw the situation on the map a couple days ago, it didn't make sense to resist. I suggested that the Ukrainians should immediately pull out. Withdraw your men from the east side of the river, that is everyone defending Krasna. At the same time, send lots of reinforcements into the salients to protect the flanks. Then in the north it would be time to withdraw from Paraskoviivka, which ended up happening. Here in this video, a Ukrainian 2S7 Pion self-propelled howitzer moving towards Bakhmut. And these Ukrainian soldiers sent to the trenches to strengthen the critical parts of the front. Such infantry units rely on fire support from mobile artillery units mounted on top of pickup trucks. And their role is to fire on Wagnerian units trying to infiltrate through Ukrainian positions. Once again, there was no other choice for Ukraine. Just like you can see right here with this footage where we see Ukrainian soldiers retreating from Krasna. On the 11th of February, Wagner stormed Krasna and captured the entire east bank of the river. And on the next day, the 12th, they continued their attack and crossed over the river and were now starting to encircle Paraskoviivka. And this is when Wagnerians posed in front of the same Krasna sign. Meanwhile, heavy fighting was taking place in the northern part of Paraskoviivka. They quickly took many videos to show their progress to everyone. And by the 14th of February, the Wagnerians, the orchestra, had now turned Paraskoviivka into a cauldron. And in this pocket, facing encirclement, it is estimated that there were around 1,000 to 2,500 Ukrainian soldiers. The most important positions that the Russians captured was the high ground overlooking the village, from where they could position anti-tank weapons, like this SPG-9 to destroy any armored vehicle leaving or entering the place, like this Max Pro getting fired at by 2 RPGs. The battle in this sector was truly ferocious. You had all the Ukrainians withdrawing from these cauldrons, mixed in with all the reinforcements coming to hold the line and to avoid a complete rout. Here you can see a Ukrainian fire team that stacked multiple RPGs and firing them one after the other at incoming Russian armored vehicles, as the Ukrainian defenders were preparing to withdraw. On the 16th of February, the Wagner Orchestra stormed Paraskoviivka, which they secured on the 17th. This time it seemed that the Ukrainian withdrawal was rushed. Here you can see some Ukrainians that managed to escape from the cauldron. They say they're very hungry and dirty, but at least they're alive. This one says they have escaped from the hot zone, having suffered some wounded and KIA, but now they're alive and out of this mess. The Ukrainians did everything to avoid the same situation that happened in Mariupol to happen once again, when 1,000 of their elite Marines got trapped in a district of the city and had to surrender. Here you can see a Russian soldier removing the Ukrainian flag from Paraskoviivka. And here's a Russian war reporter confirming that he is in Paraskoviivka as well. And that same war reporter then shows all the weapons that the Wagnerians have captured in Paraskoviivka, many of which are actually Western military equipment. So here's a challenge for you. Can you name all the weapons that he displayed? Apparently they also found some finished 50mm mortar shells. Without losing the tempo, the Russians immediately went back on the offensive. They quickly broke through the second line of defense by breaking into the fields right between Berkhiva and Yahidne. By the 19th of February, and by now you know the rhythm and sound of the Wagner orchestra, the musician turned Berkhiva into a cauldron, and once again by controlling the high ground overlooking the village.
First time.
So it's very interesting to see on a tactical level how the Russians managed all these breakthroughs. They kept pushing further and further, advanced through the fields to conquer the terrain, and to force the enemy into small cauldrons. This is what they did in Solidar, and this is the same methodology they're doing one village after another. To me, it seems that the Ukrainian defenses north of Bakhmut have been disorganized, and that units often find refuge in these urban settlements, which end up being traps. Welcome to History Legends. Here are the latest news of the Russo-Ukrainian war. Remember that if you're new to the channel, make sure to like and subscribe. We're almost at 250,000 subscribers, a quarter of a million. But as you know, just like with many other commentators, some of my Ukraine videos have been targeted with limited or no ads. So make sure to subscribe to my Patreon or PayPal to keep the show running. Thank you to everyone that has helped, and welcome to the headquarters. Counterattack in Bakhmut. Let's continue to talk about the operational side of the Battle of Bakhmut. So Wagner made a lot of progress on the northern part of Bakhmut, but on the southern part, things went south. Right here, southwest of Bakhmut. On the 12th of February, advanced parties, Wagner DRGs, reached the TO504 road. Because of that, Ukrainians quickly blew up a bridge on this road to avoid Russians from using it. Now in this chaotic fog of war, it was reported that a unit of the 53rd Ukrainian Mechanized Brigade destroyed 2 friendly infantry fighting vehicles that were carrying 15 wounded soldiers. Now, in my previous videos, I was mentioning how the Ukrainians were gathering a lot of forces near Chasiv Yar in order to reinforce the sector in this extremely strategic position, just like this Ukrainian tank heading towards the battlefield. So while Wagner PMC was launching its Ride of the Valkyries offensive in the north, the Ukrainians believed the best defense is offense, and they spanked the Russians. On the 13th of February, the Ukrainians launched a big counterattack to regain control of this road, and even reconquered a huge chunk of this forest. In my opinion, what happened is that Wagner only had light infantry units in this sector, and the Ukrainians counterattacked with mechanized forces, and Wagner DRGs simply pulled back. Now it's also very possible that after the northern breakthrough, Wagner simply concentrated most of its reserves there and not in the south, where they were facing stiffer resistance. Now with the Ukrainians having plugged the gap in the sector of Ivanivsky, Wagnerians decided to attack through this forest here, another place where they can cut this TO504 road. So according to recent reports, regular Ukrainian battalions in Bakhmut were reinforced by units of the territorial defense previously deployed in Kherson, or various reservists or even soldiers that just came back from Russian captivity, like this 30-year-old man called Pavel. On social media, his wife wrote the following: "In October 2022, my husband Pasha was captured by the Russian army. Then it seemed to me that nothing could be more terrible than this. He was traded in December, and he finally came home to me and his family. And then he was sent to the front again. Again to this hell of a war, as if he had not yet suffered from it." So Pavel, or Pasha, the nickname of it, Pavel wondered what should be done, but since he was called back, he had no other choice but to return to the front. His wife continues, "A little more than a month has passed since that moment. My husband died. He had already miraculously survived once, but no, he had to be sent to die again." It's a horrible story. Despite these reinforcements, reports mention that Ukrainian companies and battalions are only at 50 to 60% of their full strength. The last thing I wanted to talk about regarding Bakhmut is this rather strange event. Check out this still frame from February 2nd. We see 5 foreign medical volunteers seemingly treating a wounded soldier. Among them was a former US Marine, Pete Reed. And what you can see is an instant before a missile hits their position. You can literally see the missile right there. Turns out someone filmed the entire thing.
In here, exiting the white van, come under vicious attack.
As you can understand, I censored a few parts, but you can hear the survivor scream after that. It's quite disturbing. But yeah. And in response, the Russians published this video where they claim to target ambulances like the one you can see on screen, because Ukrainians use the cover and immunity of these vehicles for the delivery of reinforcements and ammunition, which generally speaking is not incorrect. Like in this footage where we can see the Ukrainians use a lot of civilian vehicles to move their mortar units around. But I think that in this specific case, this vehicle was actually used to transport wounded soldiers. The Russian breakthrough was also possible because the Ukrainians abandoned all their positions west of the Bakhmutka river towards a second line of defense located on a set of heights. But the withdrawal seems to have gone wrong. I suppose the Russians were on their tails and immediately captured the second line of defense by the 13th of February. And they even pushed further on the 14th. And let me tell you, this is a very solid position to protect the Russian flank. In the near future, I see the Russians push north of the salient to halt any Ukrainian reinforcements from intervening. Currently, Berkhiva is in a cauldron, and the Russians claim to control 40% of Yahidne. If they storm and secure these positions, this would unlock the access to this entire valley. Using the cover of this forest, they could put Dubovo-Vasilivka into a cauldron. Then Russian forces could make moves along this rail embankment and fall back towards the high ground in Khomove. Which means Ivanivske would be the only way out for the Ukrainian garrison of Bakhmut, and Wagner's entire encirclement operation could also be used as a staging ground in the future against Chasiv Yar, which in my opinion is the key to the Donbass. Another hint that the Wagnerians decided to put their main effort in this direction is that they basically stopped any push towards Siversk. I never really believed in this option because if Wagner turned away from Bakhmut to capture Siversk, it would be the biggest military blunder of history. But this also shows that the Russians want Bakhmut. The goal is not only to destroy the Ukrainian army there, they want the town. If they manage to capture Bakhmut, then perhaps they will go for Siversk. Maybe. But for this offensive on Siversk to work, Wagner needs the Luhansk front to move. The Luhansk front, the frozen offensive. Now just to give you an idea of how the front evolved, here was a situation on January 1st, and here's a situation now. Overall, many Russian commentators are saying that the Luhansk offensive, the big winter offensive, is too slow for their liking, despite the large number of Russian forces deployed in this sector. Now others explain that the Russian army there is actually in active defense, and not in a full-blown offensive. Is it the truth, or are they coping? I personally think that the main focus of the Russian army today is Bakhmut, but that at the same time they also want to put pressure on secondary fronts to fix Ukrainian reserves and avoid them from intervening in Bakhmut. If the Ukrainian assault on the city failed, the Russian counteroffensive is facing a lot of resistance, since Ukrainians are stubbornly holding onto this forested area south of Kremina. As you know, and like I said many times, Ukrainians are expert in building defenses. I call them an army of beavers. They can build you a fortified trench network overnight like that. Now, not only do Ukrainians benefit from the advantage of being a defender, they benefit from fortified positions and from a forested terrain. The Russians try to counter this by using their firepower advantage to creep their way forward. The process is slow, but I wouldn't want to be on the other side of this BMP-2M. As you can see in this video, the 237th Airborne Assault Regiment is attacking through this very dense forest, which is perfect for defenders, as it provides perfect cover and camouflage, which Ukrainian soldiers use perfectly to create a network of dugouts and underground tunnels. Here you can see a typical Ukrainian fortified position. There's a main trench line, and then little dugouts used as firing positions. And here's a Ukrainian soldier quickly running away from a drone towards what seems to be the entrance of an underground tunnel. For example, this other Ukrainian firing position was manned by 7 Ukrainian soldiers, which would be equivalent to a reduced squad. And notice how they're all wearing this white camo. In this sector, as you saw in the previous footage, Russians make heavy use of small drones to guide mortar or auto-grenade strikes on enemy positions. Only after having suppressed Ukrainian firing positions can Russian infantrymen storm Ukrainian defenses. And when they're successful, sometimes they come back with POWs. Now there's an interesting anecdotal story. These Ukrainian soldiers that were just recently captured asked their guards for one last cigarette. Basically, they expect to be shot. But the Russians are a bit shocked because they're like, no, you'll just be sent to the rear. There's also this interesting story of Russians claiming they have eliminated a female Ukrainian sniper. The Russian infantry also always attacks alongside armored support. So here you can see a Russian T-72B3M made in 2022 firing on Ukrainian positions in Krasna. As you can imagine, the forest and the bad weather make it very difficult for Russian tankers. And here's a rare and interesting footage of tanks getting refueled in the snow and the cold after a combat mission. This logistical aspect is crucial but most often forgotten by the media. Now quickly on the Zaporozhye front, precisely in the city of Bakhmut. There was the story where Wagnerians were spotted there, as well as 50 buses, which could be transporting 2,000 members of the PMC, probably for an assault somewhere on the Zaporozhye line. But in his interview, Prigozhin said happiness loves silence. It would be really out of character for Wagner to film themselves in Bakhmut just for fun. So I think it could be a diversion. All I see in this frame is perhaps 10 men. Maybe all these buses are actually empty and it's just a diversion. As you know, I'm also preparing a separate video on the failed Russian offensive on Vuhledar, because this event deserves a more detailed tactical analysis. That's all I have for you today. Let me know in the comment section what you thought of my analysis. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to support my work, make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal. The links are in the description below.